A single spotlight falls on a courtroom bench, illuminated by the harsh glow of fluorescent lights overhead. Tension hovers in the stale air, broken only by the shuffle of papers and the quiet hiss of whispered conversations. At the heart of it all stands a tall, unyielding cop, determined to assert his power, believing himself invincible among the blind justice and stiff wooden pews. But what happens when his authority is challenged by someone with far greater power? Stay tuned to Dark Stories to find out. Nearby, a dignified black woman in a crisp suit watches every move, calm as a statue. Little does the officer know, she wields far more authority than even the judge presiding. A shocking chain of events is about to unfold. Can one woman's resolve bring down a corrupt system? Keep watching Dark Stories to uncover the truth. Philadelphia's City Hall loomed large against a gray February sky. The wind that ripped through Market Street felt sharp enough to slice through bone. Police officer Christopher "Chris" Malone tugged his navy blue jacket tighter around his broad shoulders, sidestepping a slick patch of ice as he approached the courthouse entrance. Chris Malone had served in the Philadelphia Police Department for nearly 15 years. He was no stranger to the labyrinth of corridors and the endless line of security checkpoints. Though the city's crime rate hovered high in national statistics, Malone's zone was known for even harsher realities: poverty, violence, and tense relations between citizens and the police. That tension had seeped into Malone's perspective over time. He was rough with detainees, unapologetic in traffic stops, and known to be by the book in a way that sometimes went beyond ethical boundaries. But his colleagues respected him, or perhaps feared him. Rumors whispered through the precinct about his eagerness to flex his authority on anyone who dared to challenge him. He prided himself on having no illusions. This was a rough city, and he was determined to do what he believed necessary to keep order. The line between order and oppression, though, had grown blurry. That morning, he was making his way to a hearing that involved a small-time drug possession case. The suspect was only 19, but Malone had insisted the arrest was rock solid. Standing at the metal detectors, he nodded to the guards, who waved him through without so much as a second glance. Familiarity had its privileges. Inside the courthouse lobby, the chill of winter seeped away, replaced by a close, anxious warmth. Lawyers in wool coats lugged bulky briefcases, harried interns balanced stacks of files, and bleary-eyed defendants huddled at benches, awaiting their turn in front of the judge. The echo of voices and footsteps bounced off marble floors. Malone spotted a slender, well-dressed black woman leaning against the far wall, reading some documents. She wore a tailored black suit with a crisp white blouse, and her dark hair was swept back into a neat chignon. Her posture was confident, perhaps too confident, Malone thought. He frowned for a moment, noting she didn't look like the usual public defenders he'd encountered over the years. She seemed more poised, more resolute. Her eyes flicked up, caught his gaze, then just as quickly fell back to the papers in her hand. He shrugged off a fleeting sense of curiosity and continued on his way to courtroom 302. He had more pressing matters to occupy his mind. The next hour would be a routine hearing to confirm the charges. The teenage suspect's attorney might try to plead for leniency. Malone didn't plan to budge an inch. As he walked, his radio crackled with mundane updates from dispatch: minor car accident on Walnut Street, suspicious persons reported near an abandoned factory, typical city chatter. Malone barely paid attention. The boy in lockup was the real matter at hand. He had found enough paraphernalia in the kid's jacket to suggest heavier crimes in the near future if a strong message wasn't sent now. He stepped into the courtroom, the stale air of justice thick around him. Attorneys bustled, a family conferred anxiously in the gallery, and the judge scanned through a docket with mechanical efficiency. Malone took his seat near the front, where officers often sat. Someone else entered behind him, footsteps measured and composed, before settling on the opposite side of the aisle. Glancing back, he realized it was that same well-dressed black woman. She didn't acknowledge him, yet he felt an odd twist of tension in his gut. He brushed it aside, unaware that her presence would soon change the course of his life. The hearing began on schedule. The judge, a seasoned man named Judge Harold Lindstrom, presided with a demeanor that blended weariness and stern formality. The prosecutor, a fresh-faced assistant district attorney, read the charges to the court: possession of narcotics with intent to distribute, resisting arrest, and obstruction of justice. The defendant, slumping in a wrinkled shirt a size too big, cast furtive glances at the gallery, where a woman, likely his mother, sat wringing her hands. Officer Malone was called to testify to the details of the arrest. He stood, approaching the bench with heavy steps. He delivered the usual script. The suspect was loitering in a known drug area, looked nervous when approached, tried to flee. Malone's tone was clinical, though laced with underlying severity. He emphasized how the suspect had refused to comply, backing toward a deserted alley. By the time Malone finished, the teenager's mother was on the verge of tears. Next, the defense attorney, a beleaguered public defender with hastily collated notes, tried to poke holes in the narrative. He asked about possible misidentification, about the reasonableness of the search. Malone answered with mechanical precision, unwavering, as if from a prepared manual. In the midst of cross-examination, Malone's eyes wandered to the gallery. The well-dressed black woman sat with her legs crossed, arms folded across her chest, as she listened intently. She didn't seem to be connected with either the prosecution or defense. There was something in her gaze, focused, almost disconcertingly so. The defense attorney concluded his questioning, stammering a bit under Malone's unwavering stare. The judge nodded and asked if there were any others who wished to address the court. To Malone's surprise, the woman rose. She walked confidently to the front, her heels clicking in the silent air. She introduced herself as Miss Clarissa Johnson. That name was not known to Malone or, by the look of it, to the entire court. She spoke with calm, clear authority. Your Honor, I believe there's additional context we should consider before finalizing how this case proceeds. I've been observing the actions surrounding this arrest, and I have reason to believe we need more extensive review. Malone stiffened, annoyance flashing across his face. Who was she to second-guess him in open court? The prosecutor looked equally bewildered, and the judge's eyebrows rose. Judge Lindstrom cleared his throat. Miss Johnson, I'm not familiar with your role in these proceedings. Are you with the district attorney's office? Her lips curved in a polite smile, but her voice remained unshaken. No, Your Honor. I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A hushed murmur rippled through the courtroom. Malone's jaw clenched. FBI? This was no routine drop-in. And why would the FBI be involved in a simple drug possession case? Judge Lindstrom adjusted his glasses, looking more intrigued than alarmed. Miss Johnson, it's unusual for the Bureau to weigh in on a minor narcotics offense. May I ask for clarification? She offered a respectful nod. Certainly, Judge. I'm not at liberty to disclose the specifics at this time, but my presence here is part of an ongoing federal investigation. I can say that certain elements of this arrest, along with other incidents in this precinct, have drawn our attention. For now, I request that the court keep this case open while additional inquiries are made. Malone felt heat creeping up his neck. He never liked outsiders meddling in department affairs, let alone the FBI. The tension in the courtroom grew palpable, and the judge glanced from Miss Johnson to the district attorney, then to Malone. The ADA cleared his throat, uncertain how to proceed. Finally, Judge Lindstrom nodded. Miss Johnson, I'll allow your request. This hearing will be continued pending further investigation. He banged his gavel lightly. We're adjourned. A flurry of whispers and motion overtook the room. Miss Johnson didn't look at Malone as she walked away, but he felt her presence like a blazing sun at his back. She just disrupted his case, publicly, no less. He narrowed his eyes, certain that trouble had just found him in the form of this enigmatic FBI woman. Outside the courtroom, chaos replaced the usual hum of courthouse routine. The teenager's mother looked hopeful, hugging her son's attorney with relief. Reporters had not been present for this low-level hearing, but word spread quickly through the corridors that an FBI agent had stepped in at the last minute. Lawyers and clerks craned their necks, whispering theories of corruption, abuse of power, or undisclosed bigger fish. Malone, seething with frustration, strode over to the vending machines, aiming to settle his nerves with a cup of lukewarm coffee. Colleagues from his precinct soon congregated around him. Man, what was that about? Asked Officer Tim Rogers, a younger cop with wide, worried eyes. Malone shrugged. Beats me, but I'm not letting them drag me into some witch hunt.
I followed procedure. The punk had the drugs on him, no question about it. Officer Janet Phelps joined them, crossing her arms over her bulletproof vest. You think it's about you specifically? She leaned in, whispering, I heard that woman mention other incidents. She must be investigating something bigger. Let her investigate, Malone said through gritted teeth. I've got nothing to hide. But as the words left his mouth, he recalled all the times he'd bent protocol. He had, on occasion, bullied suspects into confessions, overshadowed them with intimidation, or performed searches in gray areas of probable cause. If any of that had been caught on camera or reported, he could be in deep trouble, especially if the FBI was rummaging around the precinct, looking for any sign of wrongdoing. He took his coffee from the machine, the hot liquid sloshing ominously in the cheap paper cup. The tension in his gut remained. He was determined to retain his composure, especially in front of younger officers who looked up to him. For years, Malone had enjoyed near untouchable status. He considered himself a realist, the kind of officer who got results. But the veneer of invincibility began to crack under the idea of a federal investigation spearheaded by that Miss Johnson. While Malone brooded, Clarissa Johnson walked briskly down the corridor. Her confidence turned heads, but she neither invited nor acknowledged the stares. She carried an air of purpose that said she didn't have time for idle chit-chat. What the gathering officers failed to notice was that Clarissa had paused near the elevator, talking quietly with an older man in a charcoal suit. He gave a subtle nod, and they exchanged files. Perhaps it was for a different case, or maybe it was the very documents linking Malone's name to a pattern of questionable arrests. It was impossible to say, but Clarissa's calm expression never wavered as she stepped into the elevator, disappearing behind its silver doors. When the courthouse settled, Malone made his way out, the cold wind biting at his face as he crossed the plaza. He jammed his free hand into his pocket, flipping through mental scenarios of what the FBI might be after. Had there been complaints filed against him? Possibly. People threaten lawsuits or internal affairs complaints all the time. Most of the time, they led nowhere. Yet something about Miss Johnson felt different. She wasn't some rookie. Her quiet intensity, that unwavering stare, suggested a seasoned professional with a carefully honed sense of justice, the kind that didn't back down easily. Malone climbed into his squad car, tossing the half-empty coffee on the passenger seat. His jaw remained tight as he turned the key in the ignition. He reminded himself that he had years of experience navigating tricky waters. The FBI-led prosecutor or not wouldn't catch him unprepared. At least, that's what he tried to believe. A few hours later, Clarissa Johnson entered the Philadelphia field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, located in a nondescript building near Arch Street. It hummed with activity agents, analysts, and administrative staff all churning through the daily tasks of federal law enforcement. She flashed her ID at the security station and moved briskly down a corridor lined with half-open doors. Inside a small conference room, she met with a group of fellow agents and legal advisors. On a whiteboard, pinned photos and typed notes connected lines of potential misconduct within the Philadelphia Police Department. Rumors of fabricated charges, questionable searches, and excessive force had circulated for years. Now, the Bureau had cause to suspect deeper misconduct, possibly orchestrated by a small group of officers who either turned a blind eye or actively participated in unlawful practices. Clarissa had been assigned as the lead prosecutor on what was shaping up to be a major case. She'd started her career as a top student at Temple University's Beasley School of Law, a real institution in Philadelphia, then moved swiftly through the ranks at the Department of Justice before collaborating with the FBI on high-profile investigations. It wasn't common for the FBI to bring in a special prosecutor unless the matter was deemed of considerable importance. That day in court, she'd focused specifically on Officer Christopher Malone, whose record displayed a pattern of heavy-handed arrests. The father of that teenage suspect had approached the Bureau months ago, insisting that Malone had planted evidence on multiple young men in his neighborhood. Internal affairs had seemingly dismissed or shelved the complaints, but Clarissa and her team had begun to gather their own documentation. "Any word on Malone's reaction to your move today?" asked Special Agent Darius Green, a tall, mild-mannered man with close-cropped hair. Clarissa set a slim folder on the table. "He's not pleased, from what I've gathered. His bravado will likely push him to double down."
He feels untouchable and might do something careless under the pressure.
Agent Green nodded. Good. Pressure can make suspects reveal themselves more clearly. But let's be cautious. He might lash out unpredictably. We need to protect the kid and his family. Clarissa gave a firm nod. Agreed.
I'll request protective surveillance for the boy's family, just in case. Their conversation then turned to broader matters, which officers in Malone's circle might be complicit, how local politicians could be involved, and the timeline for building an ironclad case. Clarissa's calm composure belied the complexity of the task. She knew that exposing police corruption was never straightforward. There would be pushback from within the department and from influential figures in the city who disliked negative attention. But she also believed justice needed to be served. Communities of color too often faced the brunt of over-policing and questionable stops. Clarissa's own experiences had shaped her dedication. Growing up in a tough neighborhood in Baltimore, she'd seen firsthand how corrupt authorities could devastate lives. That memory fueled every step she took in her pursuit of accountability. When the meeting ended, Clarissa stayed behind, scanning through the array of files. They contained statements from witnesses who claimed Malone or his associates used intimidation tactics to silence them. There were even a few cell phone videos that caught partial recordings of rough arrests, though none were conclusive on their own. Each shred of evidence was a piece of a larger puzzle. She slipped the files into a large envelope before leaving. She allowed herself a moment to reflect. Malone, standing tall in that courtroom, arrogance in every word, had no idea of the force mobilizing against him. And if he did suspect, he might try to hide or destroy evidence. She would have to move carefully. With that, Clarissa turned off the conference room lights, stepped out into the hallway, and mentally braced herself for the next round. The storm was only beginning. Officer Chris Malone's precinct was a squat building of aging brick and fluorescent glare, located in North Philadelphia. That evening, he entered the station with an internal swirl of agitation, scanning for any sign that his colleagues had heard about the FBI's interference in the court case. By now, word had likely spread. He found Lieutenant Fred Dawson waiting in the hallway, arms folded across a barrel chest. The lieutenant's face carried a mixture of concern and sternness, two emotions that rarely visited him simultaneously. "Malone," he said in a low tone, "in my office." Malone followed. The office was cramped, stacked with case files on shelves that sagged under their weight. A half-dead fern drooped in one corner. Dawson closed the door, leaning against it. "I heard about what happened in court," he began, voice controlled. "FBI, huh?" Malone exhaled, gripping the back of a chair. "It's nonsense, Lieutenant. I made a routine arrest. The kid had narcotics on him. Suddenly, some fed wants to pretend I'm the criminal." Dawson frowned. "Malone, you know we've had complaints about excessive force. Internal Affairs looked into them, but so far, nothing stuck. Now we've got the FBI sniffing around. This is not good for the department." Malone tensed. "Are you saying you don't trust me?" Dawson shook his head. "I'm saying I have to do what's best for this precinct. And you better keep your nose clean. There can't be any more questionable stops, no more borderline force." "Understood?" Malone bit back a reply. He felt scapegoated. Still, he nodded curtly, wanting to end the conversation. As he stepped out, Dawson called after him, "Keep it professional, Chris. We can't afford a scandal." Pushing through the hallway, Malone found Officer Janet Phelps again. She peered at him with thinly veiled concern. "Lieutenant on your back?" He let out a humorless laugh. "He wants me to behave, pretend the city doesn't need firm policing." "Just be careful," she whispered. "I don't want to see you in trouble." They parted ways, and Malone went to the locker room to stow his jacket. A swirl of conflicting emotions churned in his mind, resentment, fear, a flicker of guilt. But overriding them all was defiance. He'd come from a long line of cops. He believed, truly, that a city like Philadelphia demanded a strong hand to keep criminals off the streets. That was how he justified every rough arrest, every corner cut on procedure. The only question that nagged at him was how far he could push those beliefs before hitting a wall of federal authority. He grabbed his duty belt and headed out for a patrol shift. Snow flurries drifted lazily beneath the streetlights. The radio buzzed with calls about petty vandalism, a shoplifter at a bodega, and a domestic disturbance. His mind wandered as he drove the cruiser through the labyrinth of narrow streets. Usually, the act of driving calmed him. He would hum low, scanning the sidewalks for anything suspicious. But tonight, the city's glow felt oppressive. Every shadow, every figure seemed like an informant waiting to catch him in a misstep. Eventually, he responded to a minor fender bender near a gas station on Ridge Avenue. A young man and woman argued with each other over which car had the right of way. Malone stepped out, tension flaring when the young man eyed him warily. The man's girlfriend pulled out her cell phone and started recording. Malone had grown used to bystanders recording everything, but today it felt like a personal ambush. "All right," Malone said, trying to keep his voice neutral, "let's get your statements, figure out insurance." "Keep the cell phone down, ma'am." She didn't budge. "Just making sure." "I've seen what some of you do," she muttered under her breath. His mood darkened. He wanted to lash out, to command respect the way he used to, but Lieutenant Dawson's warning echoed in his mind. "Fine, record all you want," he muttered. His pen scratched on the incident report, but inside his head, a storm brewed. "They're all out to get me," he thought, "the FBI, these civilians with their phone cameras." If he wasn't careful, he could lose everything. Or maybe he would lose everything, no matter how careful he tried to be. The cold, swirling snow outside felt like a reflection of his own frozen, uncertain future. Back at the FBI office the following day, Clarissa Johnson reviewed new pieces of evidence that had come in overnight. The teenage suspect's father had managed to supply a few phone messages from neighbors who claimed their sons had been similarly targeted by Officer Malone. Some alleged that guns or drugs were discovered in places that should have been clean. Others spoke of intimidation if they refused to comply with certain demands. Clarissa's heart sank as she read the stories. If even half these allegations were true, Malone was terrorizing whole blocks under the guise of policing. Her phone buzzed, a text from Agent Green, found new witnesses, bringing them in for interviews at 3 p.m. She checked her watch. There was enough time to put together a structured set of interview questions. She needed to verify patterns and see if there was a consistent method in Malone's approach, anything that would hold up in court. One uncorroborated story could be dismissed as hearsay, but multiple accounts featuring the same MO might build a damning case. Before she could delve deeper into the statements, her desk phone rang. "Johnson," she answered. A bright voice crackled on the line. "Miss Johnson, this is Kay O'Donnell from Morgan & Morgan's Philadelphia office. We spoke briefly last month about that potential case involving civil rights violations." Clarissa recalled the conversation. Morgan & Morgan, a well-known law firm with a considerable footprint nationwide, sometimes collaborated with federal authorities on large-scale civil suits. The firm was known for taking on big, powerful opponents, and they had resources to dig up facts in ways that supplemented criminal investigations. "I remember," Clarissa said. "Thanks for calling." Kay's voice carried a mix of excitement and gravity. "I understand you're looking into possible police misconduct. We've had additional complaints from families who think their loved ones have been framed. We'd like to share our files if you think it could help your investigation." Clarissa leaned forward in her seat. "I'm very interested. We're working hard to assemble concrete evidence. Could you bring the files by today or tomorrow?" "Absolutely," Kay replied. "I can come by after lunch." Clarissa thanked her and hung up. The puzzle pieces were multiplying. If Morgan & Morgan's civil suits lined up with the testimonies her team was collecting, they could establish a pattern that even the most skeptical judge or jury couldn't ignore. Her next phone call was to the U.S. Attorney's Office. She wanted them looped in early. While Clarissa's role as an FBI special prosecutor was somewhat unique, she often coordinated with the local U.S. attorney for final indictments. If the evidence was strong enough, they would eventually bring federal charges against Malone and possibly others. Could it extend beyond Malone? She suspected so.
Officers rarely operated in a vacuum. Silence within a department could be as deadly as active collaboration. Clarissa took a deep breath.
The weight of responsibility pressed upon her, but she also felt a steadfast resolve. She had dedicated her life to ensuring that power was not abused, that those sworn to protect and serve were held to their oaths. If Malone was systematically violating people's rights, she would bring that truth to light, no matter how fiercely he resisted. As rumors of an FBI investigation spread through the neighborhood, fear and cautious optimism stirred among residents who'd felt the brunt of Malone's tactics for years. Some believed justice might finally be served, others worried that blowback would only bring harsher harassment from the local police. At a small community center near North Broad Street, a group of mothers met for a weekly support session designed to help them navigate issues like childcare, job hunts, and safe after-school options. Tonight's conversation centered around the creeping sense of tension on their blocks. "I heard there's a lady from the FBI poking around," said Denise, a mother of two.
"They say she's the one who shut down that hearing the other day."
"Maybe that means they'll finally do something about Malone," added Carla, a mother whose son had nearly been arrested last year. "He harassed my boy just for walking home from the store, asked him if he was dealing, forced him to empty his pockets."
"Thank God he didn't plant anything."
Some nodded, others looked wary. "We can hope," one woman said quietly, eyes on the floor, "but you know how it goes. You speak up, they come for you." In the corner, a teenage boy who volunteered at the center listened intently, gripping the handle of a mop. He'd seen Malone in action once, a humiliating scene in which Malone forced a group of young men to kneel on the sidewalk for half an hour while he searched them for contraband. The boy's friend had told him, "Just pray he doesn't decide to hide something in your jacket." The memory made the teen's stomach knot. Meanwhile, at a police union gathering across town, a small group of officers complained loudly about outsiders meddling in their affairs. Some insisted Malone was a scapegoat, others felt uneasy, as if a reckoning was in the air. The union representative urged caution, reminding them to follow protocol strictly during the ongoing investigation. In City Hall, the mayor's office received calls from concerned citizens and local reporters fishing for statements. The mayor's press secretary, a woman named Jana Lowry, weighed her words carefully as she drafted a statement affirming the city's full cooperation with the FBI without admitting to any wrongdoing by the police. Such balancing acts were part and parcel of politics.
Even the district attorney's office was thrown into a quandary. Should they stand by Malone's arrests or open an internal review?
Worry bubbled among prosecutors who had relied on Malone's testimony in past cases. If he was found to have fabricated evidence in even one instance, all his prior cases could be jeopardized. By the end of the week, the tension was almost tangible. Clarissa Johnson had quietly interviewed multiple witnesses and gathered documents from Morgan & Morgan that detailed a half-dozen pending civil complaints against Malone or his immediate subordinates. Each step felt like unearthing another layer of a deep-seated problem. And yet, Malone remained on duty, unwilling or unable to see that the ground was about to crumble beneath him. He brushed off the swirling gossip with bravado, doubling down on traffic stops, searching for that faint sense of control. Unbeknownst to Malone, every new complaint, every questionable report, only added fuel to Clarissa's growing case. The wheels of federal justice might turn slowly, but they were turning. And soon, the first cracks would appear in the armor he so confidently wore. 2 weeks later, a crisp March morning breathed a hint of spring into the Philadelphia air. Officer Malone arrived at the courthouse for a follow-up hearing on the same teenager's case. This time, the judge had requested updates from the FBI to see if the charges should remain or be dismissed. Malone strode into courtroom 302 once again, shoulders squared. He still believed that official procedure would protect him. The suspect's mother and father sat in the front row, eyes alight with nervous hope. Their son, clad in a fresh collared shirt, fiddled with the collar in discomfort. At precisely 9 o'clock, Judge Lindstrom appeared, and the session came to order. The district attorney's seat was notably empty for a moment, causing a low murmur among those present. Then, to Malone's chagrin, Clarissa Johnson entered, approaching the prosecution's table. She was joined by an assistant U.S. attorney, a tall man in a pinstriped suit named Bryce Langston. Judge Lindstrom peered over his reading glasses. "Miss Johnson, Mr. Langston, I see you're representing the prosecution today.
Yes, Your Honor, Clarissa replied. We've reviewed the circumstances of this case. If it pleases the court, we'd like to provide an update. Malone's fists clenched, knuckles whitening. He suspected a trap. The teenager's defense attorney blinked in surprise, not expecting a shift in who was prosecuting. The roles seemed reversed. Why would a federal prosecutor step into what was originally a state matter? Clarissa's calm voice resonated through the hushed courtroom. In the interest of justice, we've concluded that the narcotics charges against the defendant lack sufficient evidence. Additionally, there is a credible indication that the arresting officer engaged in questionable conduct. As such, we request that all charges against the defendant be dropped, pending the outcome of a larger investigation. A stunned silence hung in the air. The judge rubbed his temple. Miss Johnson, are you implying that Officer Malone fabricated evidence? We're suggesting there is reason to believe the evidence used to justify this arrest did not originate with the defendant, Clarissa clarified tactfully. Given the gravity of these allegations, we can't proceed with a prosecution based on evidence that may have been tainted. Judge Lindstrom looked over at Malone, who had risen from his seat, face flushed. Officer Malone, do you have any rebuttal? Malone's voice emerged tight with suppressed anger. Your Honor, I have served this city for 15 years. The suspect was caught with illegal substances. There was nothing tainted about it. My record speaks for itself. Clarissa's eyes flicked to him, their gazes locked, a silent battle of wills. We have multiple witness statements, Your Honor, challenging Officer Malone's account. In light of these statements, the government believes it is unsafe to proceed with the case. The judge exhaled, glancing between Malone and the teenager's defense. Given the FBI's ongoing investigation, I will dismiss the charges. The court will not ignore allegations of evidence tampering. This hearing is concluded. His gavel struck the block, and in that instant, the teenager's family erupted into relieved whispers. The boy's mother hugged him, tears shining in her eyes. Malone glared at Clarissa, his fury almost tangible. He wanted to lash out, to accuse her of waging a personal vendetta, but words failed him as the bailiff signaled for everyone to clear the courtroom. Clarissa and Mr. Langston quietly gathered their papers. Malone stormed forward, voice trembling with rage. What the hell do you think you're doing? He hissed. She paused, turning to face him with unflinching composure. My job, Officer Malone. You'll want to speak to your attorney. He opened his mouth to retort, but she walked away, leaving him standing there, fists clenched at his sides. In that moment, he felt his carefully curated world cracking. The following days brought a deluge of administrative maneuvers. The Philadelphia Police Department placed Malone on paid leave, pending the FBI investigation, citing procedural necessity. Malone felt blindsided, though part of him had expected such a move once the judge dismissed the charges. A media frenzy soon followed. While the case was still under seal in many respects, reporters caught wind of a serious inquiry into potential corruption. Local news vans parked outside the precinct, outside the FBI building, and even outside Malone's modest row house in South Philly. His neighbors whispered about his probable guilt, while a handful still defended him, convinced it was all a smear campaign. Holed up in his living room, Malone kept the curtains drawn. One morning, he paced back and forth, phone in hand. He dialed the union representative for the 10th time, demanding updates. I need to get back on the job, he insisted. I didn't do anything wrong. But the union rep's voice was careful. Chris, it's out of our hands for now. This is a federal probe. You might consider an attorney. Malone hung up, cursing under his breath. He had always carried himself with swagger, sure of his place in the city's machinery. Now, with that foundation gone, he felt restless and exposed. Every ring of the doorbell or knock on the door might be more questions from the press, or worse, a new wave of FBI subpoenas. In a cramped second bedroom that served as a makeshift office, he rifled through old files, searching for anything that could exonerate him or at least undercut the FBI's accusations. There had to be some paper trail or video that proved his innocence. He had always believed he was simply enforcing the law, and if he pushed boundaries, it was for the greater good.
He stopped at a sealed folder labeled with the name of a prior suspect from 2 years ago. Flipping it open, he remembered how the entire case had gone down. The suspect had been convicted, partially on Malone's testimony. Now he began to wonder if the FBI was thorough. Would they re-examine that case too? A chill crept up his spine. Simultaneously, Clarissa Johnson and her team were methodically sifting through Malone's past. They requested department logs, body cam footage, and dash cam recordings. Some of Malone's body cam videos had strangely gone missing in the official archive. Other times, the footage cut out seconds before the suspect was searched. These anomalies raised red flags. In the FBI's conference room, Clarissa circled dates on a large calendar taped to the wall. Each circled day corresponded to an arrest involving Malone that had questionable evidence. Next to each date, Agent Green annotated which location, which alleged offense, and whether the suspect had filed a formal complaint. The pattern was undeniably suspicious. Across the table sat a junior analyst, tapping away on a laptop. "We've identified at least 7 cases with eerily similar circumstances, Miss Johnson. We're also hearing about intimidation tactics, threats to families who protested too loudly. The question is, how many other officers are involved?" Clarissa nodded. "Keep digging. If we can show he operated under a silent agreement with others, we can expand the charges to a conspiracy. That tends to hold more weight in court." She felt a pang in her chest, thinking about the families whose lives had been torn apart. If these allegations were true, it was her duty to make sure justice prevailed, to ensure the legal system worked for everyone, not just those with power. This moment, the moment they were so close to unveiling the truth, drove her forward. Soon, a new hearing would be scheduled, one in which Clarissa would present the initial findings to a judge and possibly a grand jury. The city's eyes were turning toward the FBI's case, and Malone, whether he realized it or not, stood on the brink of a fall far larger than any he'd ever imagined. On a chilly afternoon, Clarissa stepped out of the FBI building and into a gaggle of reporters who'd congregated on the sidewalk. Cameras clicked, and microphones jutted forward. "Miss Johnson, can you tell us if Officer Malone is the main focus of this investigation?" asked one reporter. She raised a hand politely, eyes resolute. "I can't comment on ongoing investigations. We appreciate your patience and cooperation." "Are more officers being investigated?" another called out, but Clarissa didn't answer. She continued toward an awaiting black SUV, refusing to feed the media with speculation. Inside the vehicle, Agent Green sat in the driver's seat. He gave her a sympathetic shrug as she buckled her seatbelt. "It's only going to escalate from here," he remarked, pulling away from the curb. Clarissa sighed. "I know. Our best move is to finalize the core evidence so we can secure indictments. Once that's done, it won't be just rumors." They drove in silence through the city's congested streets. The architecture shifted from gleaming skyscrapers to old brick row houses, passing neighborhoods that spanned the socioeconomic spectrum. Each block carried its own stories, both heartbreak and resilience. Agent Green stopped outside a neat duplex in a modest area near Germantown. "This is the next witness," Clarissa nodded. They exited the car, moving carefully up the steps. A lanky teenage girl answered the door, eyes wide with concern. "You're the FBI lady, right?" "Yes, I'm Clarissa Johnson." "Is your mother home?" Clarissa asked gently. The girl nodded, ushering them into a small living room where a tired-looking woman sat on a couch. Her posture was guarded, the air smelled faintly of cooking spices. The woman rose as Clarissa and Green entered, introducing herself as Patricia Jacobs. Patricia's son had been arrested by Malone 2 summers ago. The charges were eventually dropped, but not before he spent 3 weeks in county jail. The stress of that ordeal, plus the legal fees, had nearly bankrupted the family. Now the boy was off at college, trying to move on, but Patricia still nursed the wounds of that humiliating experience. She described how Malone had singled out her son while he walked home from a library job. It was dusk, and Malone claimed he saw the outline of a weapon. He forced Patricia's son to the ground, searching him. "They never found anything, but the next thing we knew, they said he assaulted the officer," Patricia explained, voice trembling. "He had no record.
He never even had a parking ticket. But all of a sudden, he was facing charges that could ruin his future. Agent Green took notes, and Clarissa asked clarifying questions. Were there any witnesses? Did Malone's camera record the incident?
There was a neighbor who saw it from her window, Patricia said. She told me Malone's body cam didn't seem to be on. She saw him fiddling with it and cursing, then he handcuffed my son, threw him in the back of the cruiser. Clarissa exchanged a look with Green, another instance of suspiciously missing or malfunctioning body cam footage. A pattern, indeed. By the time they left the Jacobs house, Clarissa had enough new intel to bolster the case further. These testimonies weren't just coincidences, they formed a tapestry of abuse that painted Malone as a repeat offender. If the evidence matched departmental logs and footage timelines, it would be extremely difficult for Malone to claim innocence. Meanwhile, Officer Malone sat in his dim living room, ignoring the phone that wouldn't stop buzzing with calls from unknown numbers. He had no appetite for the local news, which he suspected was running stories on his alleged misconduct. He remembered the day he first pinned on his badge, looking into the mirror with pride. He'd felt like a protector, a guardian of the people. Now, that reflection was fractured by accusations that threatened to bury him, or perhaps those accusations reflected a deeper truth he'd refused to acknowledge. The pressure was mounting, and he was running out of room to hide. Tension reached a boiling point when Clarissa Johnson filed an official motion to present evidence before a grand jury. The city buzzed with speculation. Was Malone part of a broader conspiracy? How many arrests would be called into question? In the middle of this turmoil, an unexpected informant reached out to Clarissa's office. Officer Janet Phelps requested a confidential meeting. Clarissa set it up at a neutral location, a small conference room at the federal building, away from prying eyes. Janet arrived in plain clothes, hair tucked under a beanie, shoulders tense with apprehension. She cast a nervous glance around before sitting across the table from Clarissa. Agent Green stood by the door, arms folded but offering a reassuring nod. Clearing her throat, Janet laced her fingers in her lap. I don't want trouble, but I also can't stand by and let innocent people get locked up. Malone, he's been crossing lines for a while. Clarissa leaned forward, speaking gently. We appreciate your willingness to speak to us. Everything you share will be handled with confidentiality until we're ready to move forward legally. What can you tell us? Janet took a shaky breath. At first, I thought he was just being tough on crime. But then I noticed too many coincidences, people complaining they were set up, missing body cam footage. I saw him once after a bust, and he looked almost triumphant. I asked him, half jokingly, did you really find that gun on the suspect? He smirked and said, does it matter? The guy's a thug. One less criminal on the street. It made my blood run cold. She went on to detail how Malone often patrolled alone, turning off his body cam mid-stop. Whenever she tried to report it through official channels, she was brushed aside or told to mind her own business. I'm worried the department is protecting him, or at least certain higher-ups are. He's got a reputation as a good arresting officer, lots of convictions. They like that for their crime stats. Clarissa's jaw tightened. Thank you for coming forward. Your testimony could be crucial, but you'll likely face backlash from inside the department. Janet nodded, tears threatening to spill. I know, but I can't keep quiet. Malone could ruin more lives, and if the Bureau is investigating, maybe the truth will come out. Clarissa and Agent Green assured Janet they would do their utmost to protect her identity until the right moment. As Janet left, Clarissa felt a mixture of gratitude and sadness. One honest officer stepping up signaled that the system wasn't entirely broken, but it also underscored just how entrenched Malone's wrongdoing might be. That night, Clarissa prepared her grand jury presentation, carefully organizing witness statements, videos, and official logs. Each piece of evidence was a jigsaw puzzle part, carefully assembled to reveal the bigger picture, a pattern of misconduct pointing squarely at Malone. She also had to consider the possibility of corruption that might extend beyond him. The truth was a heavy burden, but she was determined to see this through. Meanwhile, Malone was descending into a spiral of desperation. He knew the grand jury was convening soon. Despite disclaimers that he shouldn't contact potential witnesses, he was tempted to reach out to certain individuals.
Maybe he could persuade or intimidate them to stay silent. Rational thought warred with anger.
He felt cornered, and cornered animals could lash out in unpredictable, dangerous ways. In less than a month, everything he'd built, honor, career, pension, might collapse.
And it all traced back to that black woman in the courtroom who had stepped in with a single, devastating revelation: "I'm with the FBI."
The day of the grand jury session arrived under a bright spring sun, an ironic contrast to the storm raging in Officer Malone's life. He arrived early at the federal courthouse, flanked by his attorney, a stern man with a sharp suit and narrower moral compass. Clarissa Johnson was already inside, calmly reviewing her exhibits one last time. She felt that familiar buzz of adrenaline that came from knowing how high the stakes were. Agent Green stood nearby, shoulders relaxed, offering a supportive presence.
By mid-morning, the prosecutors began laying out their case before the grand jury.
Malone was eventually called to testify. His attorney stood by, cautioning him to answer carefully under oath. Malone maintained his innocence, claiming that any missing body cam footage was due to technical failures, that any accusations of planting evidence were vindictive lies from criminals. But Clarissa systematically presented contradictory statements, witnesses who had no reason to lie, patterns in missing footage that defied random coincidence, internal department logs that pointed to Malone's unstoppable record of found contraband. The logic was inescapable. A thick tension filled the room as grand jurors listened intently, some scribbling notes. When Clarissa revealed that an internal police officer, referred to as a confidential source, corroborated these allegations, Malone's face reddened. He gripped the edge of the table, glaring at her with contempt.
"Miss Johnson," he spat, "this is a witch hunt. You're blowing standard policing out of proportion. You sit behind a desk, you don't know what it's like on the streets."
She met his gaze, unfazed.
"Officer Malone, the evidence speaks for itself. This isn't about smearing the police, it's about upholding the law. No one is above that, not even you." Hours passed. The grand jury deliberated behind closed doors. By late afternoon, they returned a true bill of indictment for multiple counts: civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering. Malone's attorney's face fell. Malone looked stunned, shoulders sagging.
He was taken into custody right then, the bail set higher than he expected. Reporters outside scrambled for pictures. Shock waves tore through the police department, with top brass offering carefully worded statements about their willingness to cooperate with the investigation. Some officers quietly cheered that Malone's tyranny was finally meeting consequences, others seethed at what they saw as a betrayal of the blue line. Clarissa, for her part, felt a calm resolution. She stepped out of the courthouse, squinting against the flash bulbs and sunshine. She gave a brief statement, acknowledging that this was only the beginning of a legal process that might pull more individuals into its net. But justice, she believed, was taking its rightful course. Once hailed as a top arresting officer, Christopher Malone now found himself behind bars, awaiting trial. The press labeled him the face of a dirty cop scandal. Inmates recognized him from past arrests, jeering at him through cell bars when guards escorted him through corridors. It was a harsh fall. He, who once roamed the streets with authority, now encountered the very system he had manipulated. The local news broadcast images of him in a jumpsuit, leading to citywide debates about reform, accountability, and the fine line between policing and persecution. Meanwhile, Clarissa Johnson continued building the prosecution's case. Each passing day brought fresh inquiries. Other officers, emboldened by Malone's arrest, came forward with additional testimony. A former partner admitted that Malone had bragged about cleaning the streets by any means necessary, including planting small bags of narcotics. Another officer mentioned a high-ranking lieutenant who might have turned a blind eye. The entire precinct quaked beneath the weight of potential exposure. Hard karma found Malone in a variety of ways. Friends he'd once counted on distanced themselves, not wanting their own reputations tarnished. His finances, once stable, drained rapidly under mounting legal fees. His wife, who had quietly endured his late nights and moody outbursts, packed her bags and left, taking their young daughter with her. She told him she couldn't believe he'd risked everything for a twisted sense of glory. And in solitary moments, the full force of regret pressed down on him. He had become exactly what he'd once sworn to fight against: someone who misused power. To fight against someone who misused power. Whether or not he intended harm, the end result was the same. Now he faced a trial that could send him to federal prison for years. The harsh reality of that overshadowed any justifications he once offered himself. At the same time, families who had been wronged by Malone found a measure of validation. The teenage boy whose case Clarissa had dismissed took a part-time job and enrolled in community college. His mother, once worn by anxiety, now displayed renewed hope in her eyes. Patricia Jacobs, whose son had nearly lost his bright future, watched him thrive at university, free from the stain of a wrongful arrest. Whispers of justice rippled through the community. Yet Clarissa knew the road ahead remained winding. While Malone's arrest was a significant victory, the real test would be the trial. She worked tirelessly, meticulously preparing evidence so airtight that no defense strategy could find a loophole. In quiet nights spent poring over documents, the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her mind, but she never wavered. Even as the city's attention turned elsewhere, new headline stories, fresh controversies, Clarissa and her team pressed on. She recognized that truly dismantling an abuse of power required sustained effort. In quiet corners of the FBI field office, they debated how best to approach potential co-conspirators, how to secure cooperating witnesses, and how to ensure the victims were not forced to reckon with the wreckage of a life built on crossing lines. 6 months later, the trial began in a grand, wood-paneled federal courtroom. Large windows admitted the late summer sun. The air carried the charged stillness found in high-stakes proceedings. Christopher Malone sat at the defense table, looking haggard in a suit that no longer fit him quite right. His attorney spoke in measured tones, attempting to discredit witness testimonies as unreliable or biased. He claimed Malone had indeed turned off his body cam due to malfunctions, that the contraband found on suspects was real. But Clarissa Johnson calmly dismantled these arguments. She presented logs from the body cam manufacturer, showing no reported malfunctions during the times in question. She showcased consistent witness accounts of intimidation. She introduced internal police memos that suggested Malone had a troubling pattern of stops that never made it into official records. Finally, she called Janet Phelps to the stand, who bravely testified under oath about Malone's remarks and actions. The jury listened, some faces openly showing disgust as evidence of racial profiling came to light. Others stared at Malone, perhaps remembering the ideal they once held of law enforcement. After several days of testimony, the prosecution rested. In closing arguments, Clarissa's voice carried a quiet force. When those entrusted with upholding the law betray it, the damage extends beyond individual victims. It undermines faith in justice itself. The evidence shows, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Christopher Malone crossed lines over and over. No uniform or badge absolves him of responsibility. The defense offered a last, desperate plea that Malone was doing his best in a tough environment, suggesting that the ends justified the means. But the evidence was too damning. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict, guilty on multiple counts, including civil rights violations and obstruction of justice. A hush fell over the courtroom as the judge polled the jurors. Then he asked Malone to rise for the formal reading of the verdict. Malone's eyes flicked around, searching for something, perhaps a glimmer of pity or the faintest chance of redemption. He found neither. As the judge declared him guilty, audible gasps broke from some spectators. The weight of it pressed on Malone like a physical blow. He lowered his head, exhaling shakily. His attorney's hand clasped his shoulder, but there was no comfort in it. Sentencing was set for a later date, but prison time seemed imminent. Outside the courthouse, Clarissa stood at a podium to address reporters. Today's verdict affirms that no one is above the law. Our commitment is to a system where justice is impartial, serving all citizens equally. Let this be a reminder that those who abuse power will be held accountable. In that moment, Clarissa felt both relief and sorrow. Justice had prevailed, but the process had also exposed deep societal wounds. She glanced at the families of Malone's victims, seeing tears of relief, gratitude, and lingering pain. Nothing could fully erase the trauma, but at least they had a measure of closure. In the aftermath of the trial, Philadelphia began a fresh conversation about policing, transparency, and community trust. Many residents felt renewed hope, inspired by seeing a corrupt officer face the consequences of his actions. Others learned that powerful institutions are not impervious to accountability when honest people stand against them. Clarissa Johnson returned to her regular caseload, forever changed by this landmark case and the many lives it touched. Stories of justice are never just about one person's downfall, they're about communities uniting to demand better. If you believe in the power of justice and the resilience of those who stand up for what's right, share this story so others can see that change is possible. Hit the like button, subscribe to Dark Stories, and ring the notification bell to spread the message that together, we can help justice prevail.